我哋嘅，咁佢嘅名就係 Walden Bello 啦。咁 Walden Bello 佢就係而家喺 University of Philippines 嗰度就教緊公共行政嘅。咁佢之前都喺Berkeley 嗰度教過嘅。佢今日咧就會同我哋講話 lessons learned from social movements around the world。咁我哋同場咧都會有翻譯員幫大家翻譯嘅。咁佢喺以前參加過好多唔同嘅 social movement 啦。咁佢係參加過菲律賓嗰邊嘅民主運動，亦都曾經坐過監。咁我相信大家可以喺佢身上面學到好多嘢。咁我哋而家有請 Walden Bello。
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to participate in this forum around democracy. Tonight, I will not be speaking about what's happening here in Hong Kong, which is an event that is so precious, so important, and is really something that teaches us all over the world about the value of democracy.
咁非常感謝大家俾我嘅機會啦，咁我好高興可以嚟到呢度觀摩到香港呢個非常之珍貴嘅一個民主運動。咁香港人今次喺呢度亦都教咗我哋世界各地嘅人好多關於呢個運動嘅點樣去運作，點樣去呢個爭取民主嘅經驗。
Let me just say that I would like to share some of the experience of democratic movements that I have either been part of or have studied closely. First of all, I think that the fight for democracy in the last 3 decades has taken many forms, and it has taken many types of movements. The first thing I would like to speak about is the fight for democracy against the dictatorships that were imposed on developing countries like the Philippines, like Chile, like Argentina in the 1970s, and what are the lessons we can derive from them?
咁其實世界上嘅民主運動有好多種唔同嘅形式啦，咁包括我自己都係參與過好多嘅呢啲民主運動，亦都有研究過呢啲相關嘅民主運動嘅。咁我而家想同大家係分享翻幾種唔同形式嘅民主運動。咁第一種咧就係喺一個獨裁政權下邊發展中國家嘅一種民主運動嘅形式啦，就好似喺菲律賓啊、喺智利啊等等嘅呢啲國家所經歷過嘅一啲民主轉型嘅運動。
The first thing I would just like to speak about is in Chile in 1970 to 1972. There was a very big democratic movement that wanted to deepen the democratic process in Chile. And what they called that movement then was the peaceful road to socialism through votes, through elections. And just like here in Hong Kong, the young people of Chile took a very, very critical and important role in leading that movement along with political parties and the labor movement. So I had the opportunity to observe this movement and show how energetic it was. Unfortunately, that movement in the form of the Popular Unity Government was overthrown by a military coup in 1973. And those who were fighting for democracy during that period, many of them were killed, many of them were tortured, many of them were put into detention.
咁首先我想講翻智利嘅民主運動，咁嗰時係71年、72年到嘅時候啦。咁嗰時佢哋有一個好大型嘅群眾嘅民主運動，要求係一個和平咁轉向一個社會主義嘅一個國家。咁當時其實學生同我哋而家一樣啦，都係成個運動嘅主力。咁我哋聯合咗當時嘅一啲其他政黨去向呢個政府要求我哋要和平轉型，要有一個社會主義嘅民主國家。咁但係我Analyst 當年都係喺當場係觀察到嗰個運動，我覺得係好有力量、好有朝氣嘅一個運動。但係好不幸地啦，喺73年嘅時候咧，就有呢個軍人奪權，軍政府奪權，咁個運動就係失敗咗嘅。咁當時參與運動嘅好多學生啊，呢個運動分子、職業人士咧，都係因而要坐監啦、受到酷刑啦，甚至係死亡嘅。
think the lesson that I would like to say is that the people and the youth of Chile persisted in their opposition underground. They, in fact, did not lose their hope. They did not lose their determination, despite the dangers that they faced, despite the fact that so many were killed and so many were tortured. They kept the flame of democracy alive, and in 1990, through democratic elections, they were able to oust the dictatorship and restore democracy in Chile. So the lesson from Chile is that if you value democracy enough, you are going to be willing to fight and die for it and suffer for it, but in the end, you and the people will win.
但係智利嘅古仔唔係停喺呢度啦。咁我想講係繼續落去嘅發展。咁雖然嗰時73年嘅時候，因為軍政府嘅奪權運動失敗咗，但係當時嘅學生冇因而咁放棄，佢哋係喺地下繼續進行佢哋嘅民主運動。雖然我哋好多嘅朋友嘅戰友坐監、被殺、被酷刑，但係佢哋一直堅持，一直維持住呢個民主嘅火焰，直到1990年嘅時候，終於智利有翻選舉，終於有翻民主。咁我想同大家講嘅就係咧，只要你可以堅持落去喺呢個民主嘅運動上面，如果你係願意為呢個民主去犧牲、去付出嘅話，終有一日你係會得到民主嘅。
The second example that I would like to raise is the example in my own country, the Philippines. Well, many of you are very young, and then probably you do not remember the time when a man named Ferdinand Marcos, ruled the Philippines. In 1972, Marcos destroyed Philippine democracy and imposed military rule. In the next 14 years, he set up detention centers. Many people were killed, many people disappeared, so many people were tortured. And indeed, this was a very dark period in our history.
咁我第二個想講嘅例子就係菲律賓我自己嘅國家嘅例子。咁好多呢度嘅朋友都比較年輕啦，可能你哋唔記得菲律賓曾經有過一個叫 Marcos 嘅獨裁者。咁佢當時喺72年嘅時候咧，摧毀咗菲律賓嘅民主啦。咁佢當時嘅獨裁政權下，佢設立咗好多嘅一啲拘留所，好多人喺入邊被監禁、被酷刑。
Well, again, just like in Chile and in Latin America, the people did not give up hope. They went underground. Many of them adopted different forms of struggle. For 14 years, they struggled. One of our leaders, Benigno Aquino, came back to the Philippines in 1983, and he was assassinated by Marcos agents at the airport. When that happened, the whole Filipino nation exploded in anger, and from that time on, it was impossible for the dictatorship to rule or to continue to rule. And in 1986, a big popular uprising from youth, from students, from workers, from peasants, all over the country, overthrew the Marcos dictatorship and established the democracy that we have in the Philippines right now. And again, just like the example in Chile, what this means is that if you value democracy enough and are willing to fight and willing to die for it, in the end, you will win. Because against the people's will, guns are powerless.
咁菲律賓嘅古仔入邊就係話，但係因為嗰時嘅反對派咧都冇因此而失去希望，佢哋喺14年呢個 Marcos 嘅獨裁政權期間14年間都繼續去堅持佢哋嘅民主鬥爭。佢哋喺地下做鬥爭，佢哋連結不同嘅社會上面嘅力量、學生團體、勞工嘅團體，去繼續爭取佢哋嘅民主。咁當喺83年嘅時候，反對派嘅領袖阿堅奴西去回國嘅時候咧，喺機場俾當時嘅獨裁者派一啲殺手暗殺咗。咁因為嗰件事激發咗全個國家嘅人民嘅憤怒，咁自嗰一刻起咧，成個國家嘅民主浪潮就已經不可能再停止落嚟啦。咁終於喺1986年有一個好大嘅群眾運動，終於就推翻咗當時嘅一個獨裁政權，建立喺菲律賓嘅一個民主政制。咁我想講嘅就係咧， 如果你係夠足夠去珍惜民主、重視民主、願意為民主犧牲、願意為佢付出嘅話，咁你終於係會能夠爭取到民主嘅到來嘅。因為槍炮喺人民嘅民意面前，喺人心面前係無能為力嘅。
The third example I would like to bring up is a country that is very close to Hong Kong, and that is South Korea. South Korea is today a democracy, but people also had to fight in order to bring back democracy in South Korea. For about 40 years, South Korea was ruled by a very brutal dictatorship. First, it was the Park Chung-hee dictatorship, and then it was the dictatorship of his successors, the generals, the military. And again, I would just like to say here that youth and labor played a very, very important role in the struggle to restore or to bring democracy in Korea. And one of the things that was very impressive was what is called altruistic suicide. Many of the South Korean labor leaders, like Jang Tae-il, sacrificed themselves, committed what is called, they killed themselves. And they said that they were killing themselves because their blood would create the seeds of martyrs, and that their blood would eventually overflow in the land and result in democracy. When I went to Korea in 1988, this was the height of the struggle, and the students, many of them loved freedom so much that they were jumping from the cathedrals, from the buildings, and in fact this sort of self-sacrifice indeed created the situation that the dictatorship could no longer hold, and it was overthrown by this alliance of Korean workers and Korean students. So what we have now in South Korea is not something that just came into being by accident. It was a democracy that was fought for by the people, by the students, by labor, and it was a democracy. It is a democracy whose seeds were sown by the sacrifice of the people in Korea. So again, the lesson is, if you value democracy and freedom, you must be prepared to sacrifice for it.
咁我第三個想講嘅例子係南韓嘅例子。咁南韓而家係一個民主國家啦，但佢唔係一直都係一個民主國家嘅。喺之前嘅40年間，佢一直係一個獨裁嘅政權下面。咁當時亦都係啦，當時嘅年青人，當時嘅勞工工人，佢哋一齊聯合起嚟去對抗喺呢個獨裁嘅政權，一直喺度爭取民主。咁南韓嘅民主運動有個好特別嘅地方，就係佢哋入面係有好多呢個形式嘅所謂或者一個信念或者價值嘅一種自殺嘅情況出現嘅。咁佢哋當時就有好多嘅一啲公運嘅領袖啦，佢哋會話我為咗民主，我選擇去自殺，我以我嘅血去喚醒我哋嘅人民，以我哋嘅血去種植民主嘅花朵。咁當我嗰時88年嘅時候去到南韓嘅時候，就啱啱係民主運動最興盛嘅時候。咁當其時好多好年輕嘅學生，佢哋有好多自己嘅理想。但佢哋都為咗呢個民主嘅呢個追求，佢哋從教堂嘅頂端，從建築物嘅頂跳落嚟自殺，為咗喚醒佢哋國家嘅人民。咁終於佢哋呢種嘅行為激化咗南韓嘅民主浪潮，而南韓嘅獨裁政權亦都最終係被推翻咗嘅。咁南韓嘅故事都告訴我哋啦。如果你足夠重視民主，你足夠珍惜民主同埋自由，願意為之犧牲嘅話，你終於係會可以得到民主嘅。
The last two examples that I have, because I realize there are more speakers here, is really... I'm the last speaker, okay. Are two big movements that swept the world in the early part of the 21st century and just a few years ago. I'm talking about the anti-globalization movement, okay? the anti-globalization movement was a democratic movement against inequality. It was a protest against the way that corporations and free trade and multilateral organizations like the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the IMF were putting the world under the dictatorship of capital, of corporate capital.
咁我最後想講多兩個嘅一個民主運動啦，其中一個就係呢個反全球化嘅運動。咁我會將反全球化運動稱之為民主運動。咁點解呢？咁其實反全球化就係反對一啲企業嘅獨裁，一啲企業嘅話晒事嘅一個情況。咁其實佢亦都係一種嘅民主化嘅運動。咁呢個運動喺上個世紀初啦，同埋啱啱結束嘅個世紀末嘅最後幾年都係橫掃全球嘅。
The anti-globalization movement was a trans-border movement. It went across borders. It was led by student peasant groups, workers that united beyond borders in their opposition to the way that the corporations were destroying the world and were destroying society. And what we saw was that the people united across borders can be a very, very strong force. This happened, or the major event that happened here was in Seattle in 1998, when 50,000 people coming from all over the world, working together, were able to bring down the World Trade Organization, which was the prime instrument of corporate capital's rule. And the World Trade Organization is no longer effective organization. What happened was that the power of the people across borders coming together in events like here. And in 2005, I was part of the trans-border anti-globalization movement that came to Hong Kong back then. And the World Trade Organization held its meeting, but it was surrounded by people that came from all over the world, and we braved the tear gas. We were able to beat back the forces of repression, and the World Trade Organization was beaten in Hong Kong in 2005 by what? It was beaten by the power of the people, and it is no longer an effective organization. So that I think the lesson here of the anti-globalization movement is that the power of the people united across borders, in fact, is a very important, very strong democratic force that is able to face down and to defeat corporate rule.
呢個反全球化運動嘅一個特徵咧，就係佢係一個跨國界嘅運動嚟嘅。咁你喺呢個運動裏邊，你見到唔同國家嘅人都聯合起嚟去對抗翻一啲資本嘅獨裁。好似喺98年嘅西雅圖咁樣，有5萬個來自世界各地嘅人一齊去反對翻呢個世貿嘅一啲唔合理嘅一個政策。咁同樣地喺2005年，呢個反全球化嘅運動亦都嚟到咗香港。可能有啲人都記得，當時我都係在場嘅。我對台同各位嘅示威者同嚟自各個國家嘅學生、嘅農民、嘅工人一齊去對抗香港警察放出嚟嘅催淚彈，一齊去對抗香港警察嘅胡椒噴霧。咁我哋當時包圍咗世貿喺香港開會嘅場地，我哋令到世貿冇辦法再可以有效咁運作。咁大家可以見到呢個反全球化運動係真係跨地域性嘅。咁其中可以學到嘅一件事就係話咧。呢啲咁嘅跨國界嘅世界上面追求民主嘅人嘅聯合起嚟嘅力量係好強大嘅，都係可以達到改變嘅。
Finally, the last movement I would like to speak about is about the Occupy movement, especially in the United States, in Europe, and other countries. I understand that the Occupy movement has been a direct inspiration to the Hong Kong Occupy movement. And I think this was a protest against the inequality that was being created by the banks and the corporations. It was supposed to be the fight of the 99% of us against the 1% in our countries that control the big economic power, that control the political parties, that control, in fact, many parts of government. Although many of our governments are democratic, it's just that they've been subverted by corporate power. So the Occupy movement flared up in Oakland, in New York, many parts of the United States, the Indignados in Spain, in Italy, in Greece. This was a very, very big movement of the 99% against the 1%. And for a time, it was able, in fact, to face down, face up to, and be a threat against corporate rule.
咁我最後一個想分享嘅運動就係最近嘅一個佔領運動，就包括喺席捲咗呢個歐洲同埋美國嘅一個佔領運動啊！大家可能更加清楚，更加熟悉一個佔領華爾街呢個名。咁據我所知，目前喺香港嘅呢個佔領中環嘅運動都係受到呢個佔領運動嘅啟發嘅。但係當時嘅佔領運動嘅目標有少少唔同啦。佢主要針對嘅對象就係社會上面嘅不平等，針對一啲銀行啊同埋大企業嘅對呢個社會資源嘅壟斷。咁當時嘅運動席捲咗全世界，包括係西班牙又有、希臘又有、美國、紐約等等個地方都有大規模嘅呢個99%嘅人對抗呢個1%嘅人嘅一個咁嘅抗議。
But then the question is, although they were powerful at some points, okay, in the early 2000s, the anti-globalization movement, and in 2011 to 2012, the Occupy movement, the problem is, where are they today? I'm not talking about the Occupy Hong Kong movement, but the Occupy in Europe and in the North. And where is the anti-globalization movement, which was so present in Hong Kong in 2005 in the fight against WTO? The unfortunate thing is that although spontaneous people's power can really be very, very strong at certain points in time, it must be organized in order to last, in order to be permanent, in order to continually fight for its goals. And the important thing is that you cannot just rely on spontaneous feelings, spontaneous movement, that you have to translate spontaneous feelings, spontaneous power into organized power. And I think that is the lesson that has confronted the Occupy movement, confronted the anti-globalization movement. There have been no strong answers to it. You here in Hong Kong are going to be facing the same sort of issues about how to translate the spontaneous power that you find around here into effective political power. And that is the challenge before you. And I am so glad that I was able to share some of these lessons, at least lessons to me, about 5 different movements and the lessons that they have for you. And I will also bring back to my country the lessons that I have derived from you, because the world can also learn from the lessons of Hong Kong, especially the power and the idealism of the youth of Hong Kong. That is what I will bring back and tell people in my country and tell people wherever I go, that the people and the youth of Hong Kong have spoken, and we really admire them for it. Thank you very much.
其實大家見到當時好轟轟烈烈嘅，包括佔領華爾街運動，包括佢哋反世貿嘅運動，當年喺05年喺香港都係咁轟烈，咁多人參與。但係而家咧，呢啲運動而家去咗邊度咧？咁呢個就係我哋其中要學到嘅一個教訓。當然人民群眾呢個自發性嘅力量係好大嘅。當你有一啲好重大嘅事件，一啲民眾嘅情緒被呢個激發起上嚟嘅時候，群眾係當然有一個好大嘅力量。但係點樣可以將呢啲力量轉化成為一種持久嘅、可持續嘅同埋落地生根嘅政治力量，就需要有一個比較恆常持久嘅一個組織。民眾嘅一啲自發嘅一啲行動好難去持續落去，就好似大家見到呢個佔領運動嘅消逝一樣。咁我哋喺香港，我哋而家喺度嘅在座所有人同樣都要諗呢個問題。 我哋點樣可以令到呢個運動唔只係我哋喺呢度正總幾日嘅一個運動？點樣可以令到可以持續成為一個有效嘅一個政治力量咧？咁我哋其實冇人有一個好確定嘅答案俾到大家，但係我哋每一個人都要自己去思考翻呢一個嘅問題嘅。咁我其實今日就非常之榮幸可以同大家分享翻世界上5個唔同嘅一種社會運動嘅經驗啦。我亦都從大家身上面學咗好多。咁我都會將喺香港我所見到嘅、所學到嘅帶翻去俾我哋菲律賓嘅朋友，等佢哋知道香港學生、香港青年人嘅一個理想，佢哋嘅堅持、佢哋嘅火焰。咁我非常之感謝大家俾我呢個機會，多謝大家。